This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with lead foundation phase coach at Southampton Football Club, Lee Smith. He discusses individual development plans and how coaches design their sessions in order to aid players with this, the importance of multi-sport and how this is catered for within the academy, and using different game formats in order to enhance player development. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends as we continually try and grow our audience. I hope you enjoy. Cool. So first of all, Lee, thank you for jumping on at short notice as I had someone drop out, and we've been speaking about getting this in the diary, but you managed to jump on quickly. I know we speak semi-regularly, but good weekend, all okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Just getting back into obviously football with the lads. So yeah, it's been a good weekend. And thanks for having me.
So in terms of your role, what you currently do, experiences, all that type of stuff, what's your current role? What does that entail?
So I'm currently working at Southampton Football Club. The role there is the lead foundation phase coach, and for our club, the foundation phase is 9s, 10s, 11s.
And so, what in terms of responsibilities, etc., what does that actually entail for you? What does that mean from a day-to-day, weekly basis?
Yeah, so I guess the roles changed a little bit recently in terms of probably stepping away from leading the team as probably I did previously, to sort of trying to sort of take a step back and manage the coaches and the program. Like football is at the moment, it's ever evolving and constantly growing. So I think we've adapted to that well, and sort of my role sort of adapted from that a little bit. So really, it's making sure that we're all set up in terms of what the week entails, what the month ahead looks like, making sure the coaches are prepared and the players are supported.
So obviously, Southampton is a very well-regarded academy. I've been fortunate enough to work there for a number of years, as have you. What do you think is the USP for Southampton? Why do you think they have had success in bringing players through all the way through to the first team?
Probably historically, it's always been the pathway. You know, it's been a massive selling point. You know, obviously, it's quite well known the number of players that have sort of gone through the academy into the first team and beyond that as well. So I think that's always been a strong selling point for the academy.
So in terms of for you and your role with the foundation phase players, what are you looking for them to achieve within your phase, or what foundations in the foundation phase are you looking to lay for them to move forward with?
Good question. I think when they come into us, you know, that they usually come from, I mean, the majority of the players we take on it under 9s would come through our pre-academy program, which is a fantastic program where, you know, we see over sort of 200 players across the south of England through various centres, and they sort of come in through that process of ANT centres and auditing players, and we get the players in through that. So I think that's a real positive. I think what's important whilst they join us at that age is that they continue enjoying football. I think one of our first initial challenges with that young under 9s group is they've always been the best players through their grassroots team, through the pre-academy program. They always had a lot of success. So I think it's one of the biggest challenges is continuing their enjoyment and love of football whilst it becomes a bit more challenging with the games program, with the number of hours they're doing. So I think that's something that our under 9s coaches do really, really well, where they're really balanced to make sure that it's fun, but they're also learning and they're also starting to understand what that pathway looks like. So I think that's something that's really important, that we get that balance right, you know, and ultimately they are young people, young players, and we've got to, you know, not get too serious too soon, that's for sure. I think the fundamentals really, we want our boys to enjoy the ball. like any other club, probably. We want the boys to want to get on the ball and use the ball. We call it like ball mastery, which is effectively, being able to deal with the ball, being able to master the ball and show various technical skills to support them on the ball as well as to get them out of trouble, etc. So we set up quite a lot of stuff where they understand what that is. And I think one of the biggest challenges and biggest things we try and work on with these boys is the understand the value of practice. So that's something that they can go away and work on their own time. They can work on it in training. And I think there's an aspiration there for these guys over the period of time within the academies to become self-directed learners. And that's probably starts at 9 years old and just understanding, look, if I go and work on my passing range off my weaker foot, and they can see that development over a period of time, if we can highlight that skillfully and using various staff members, parents, and that support network around the player to go, look, what you've done there is put some effort in, and you've done that over a period of time, you've got better. And at a young age, they can start to recognise that. That's really important. So that's important. I think also, like, athleticism obviously is important. I think sometimes we get drawn to players that need to be quick and strong. It's probably effective movers and they have to deal with demands of the game is quite important for us. One thing we're pretty big on in our club is multi-sports, making sure that, again, our young players at 9 years old, when they come into us in the foundation phase, don't just purely get exposure to football activities, because that's going to reduce the sort of range of movements they're going to be doing and types of movements. It's really important that we continue to stress them in different environments. So we set up quite a lot of multi-sports activities and tournaments for our younger players, and also allow them to go and play sports at school and different types of football, because that's important as well, that they get that variety.
So we'll come back to the self-directive learning stuff in a minute, because I think that's really interesting evolution within academy football, and certainly within the academy, and how that's been portrayed. Just going to the multi-sport side, I guess two questions is, one, how challenging is it as a club to incorporate that multi-sports or allow them to do the school stuff with obviously the EPPP expectations of when and how often they've got to train? And then two, could you talk through the tournaments that you've put on, which I know you've had clubs come into Staplewood previously, kind of before COVID, to do like a joint football, joint multi-sports type tournament, which was by all accounts pretty successful. So could you talk through those 2 points for us?
So in terms of the challenges, in terms of getting them to do multi-sports, I think one of the biggest things that we find is with our young players, competition's massive. So if it is competitive, I think there's a level of buy-in anyway. If it's just multi-sports or say S&C for the sake of it, sometimes the players that aren't necessarily motivated to go and do other sports don't particularly want to do that. I think you put it into a competitive environment, and certainly I would say from observations and feedback we get from the players, there's more of a buy-in to that. So I think that's important to recognise. I think with school activities, I think it's probably education. That what is the intent of this? What is the purpose? What are we trying to get from this? So the young player's going to come play for their school team. Probably they'll be one of the best players on the pitch, which therefore they'll probably be quite happy with. They'll certainly be looked up to by other players in that team. But also, they're trying new things. They might want to try and score a goal from 30 yards, and they might try and jump around the whole team. But that's practicing different things that maybe they don't normally get to practice in their normal academy experience or games program. So that's important. And again, going back to the first point about love of the game, that experience there of being the best player at school and scoring loads of goals is probably going to support you loving the game, and having some real great experiences. But also the social bit, I think sometimes with the academy system and these boys train a lot of hours, they have to travel as well to train them in some cases. So actually, going to go and play with different friends and actually just have a different social setting in that group is really important.
Yeah, I imagine, in the social aspect, how that, challenges them from maybe being the best at football to maybe not being the best at tennis or not being the best at tag rugby or American football, creates quite an interesting dynamic within the group as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you might, again, with these young players, it's probably not going to see that straight away, but there might be a level of awareness to go, well, actually, I struggle at tennis when I'm doing it, and maybe there's some messages there for the players whilst they're on their development journey with us. Social bit, I think, is important as well. That actually, look, I'm not the best player here in this sport, but again, I'll keep working at it, or I'll just do it for fun. That's fine as well. Also, going back to more of a football specific one, there's probably an opportunity to, yes, work on those technical bits, like I said, in terms of maybe weaker foot. Example of taking players on more often than they normally would in the academy system. There's also a bit around there, maybe some leadership skills, in terms of how their teammates see them. So they might see them as a captain, and actually in the academy team, maybe they see themselves lower down, for example, or they're not one of the stronger characters. Whereas that experience of being looked up to by their peers, and there's almost that different expectation based on, and it might bring out some leadership qualities or communication skills or confidence. So those other bits would probably come through as well.
Is there any ways you try and harness that, moving kind of from their school setting into your one in the academy setting?
It's difficult because we're not getting to see the boys in that setting. I mean, all we're getting is feedback maybe from the schools at times, or the players. So that is difficult. I think what you can do is continue to have variety in the academy program, so that those experiences do happen. So, as an example, we might do some games nights on a certain evening, which you then mix the players up for different reasons. So it might actually be 9s, 10s, 11s all mixed together, and they go and play. So 5-a-side, 6v6, whatever, and those teams are made up of 9s, 10s, and 11s. Where then again you've created that opportunity for those 11s to probably be maybe leaders. You're getting some real hard stretch for those 9s having to compete. But what you're getting from that is loads of variety and the players having to adapt and be exposed to different situations, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and I think it almost goes back to street football, doesn't it? When you're a kid, or when the lads, years gone by, would have gone out and played down the park, and you're 7, you're playing with a 13-year-old, and how can you affect the game but also still compete? So I was known as Chopper in mine as a 7-year-old. I just used to go around tackling all the 13s and 14-year-olds. But it's an interesting social dynamic for sure, and it does bring a level of self-awareness of what can the younger ones do in order to compete with the older ones. So linking back to the tournament, what did that tournament look like? Who was involved? How did that all work?
There's the multi-sports tournament. So we set up an activity again in the half terms. We could run this from say 9 till 4 or 9 till 3. The morning, local other professional clubs would come in, and we'd set up the morning to be multi-sports. And we play, I think, 4 sports such as dodgeball, maybe basketball, tag rugby, and that would be in a tournament format where they'd all play each other in each sport, and then you'd have a winner. And in the afternoon, then after lunch, you then go into football activities, maybe 5v5s, 7v7 games. And again, the competition element, just because they were in their club teams, was there. Everyone wanted to win, and from that, you get all sorts. You get players trying to help players. You get players maybe encouraging or at times criticising other players. And that's part of that sort of makeup that you want, where they've got a place in that team and they're trying to support each other, but also trying to win, which is important.
And did you see any differences between the football context, if they were to play a tournament in just the football context, or as they did in the afternoon, to the multi-sports in the morning? Did you see any differences in characters or team dynamics or anything like that?
Yeah, certainly there was a few lads that were more confident with the other sports because they've had more exposure to it. There's one lad that stands out where, in terms of what we saw, we would normally play him, or he sort of gravitates towards playing sort of central areas in midfield, and I think he quite likes playing that number 4 role. So when we play sort of slightly bigger formats like a 9v9, he'd play maybe as a 4, which probably results in him getting the ball and passing it quite quickly at times. Um, but we're not seeing loads of physical stuff from him, if that makes sense, because of maybe the position, the task that he's got. Whereas actually, when we put him into a tag rugby environment, he was very good at a sidestep. He was very good at getting away from players. So that's great to see that, because then you then think, well, if he can do it in that environment, could he do it in football, for example? So that led us then to have a conversation around his IDP, so his development plan, and start to look at, can we put him in different situations where maybe he's getting those more direct 1v1 situations where there's more opportunities for him to beat players or take players out of the game through different tactics, which he bought into. I think he wanted to show that he could actually do that, whereas I think because maybe over a period of time he should have played that certain role in the team, and he's shown that skill set that he's got, he's never really then took that on, and probably with the format of the pitch size, it hasn't allowed enough of those opportunities to beat players successfully for him to do it more often. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does for sure. And I think that it's obviously a really acute observation. It's like, well, actually, if he can beat a player 1v1 in rugby with moving his body, maybe he could out wide or something like that. Obviously, you've linked to their kind of IDP work, which I know is becoming more and more commonplace, kind of all the way through academies nationwide. In terms of process for you guys and formatting, etc., what does that look like? How are targets agreed? How are they monitored? How are they supported? What does that look like in your environment?
Yeah, so we've invested a bit of time and trying to sort of make these better and more established over the years. So we've moved them onto like an online platform, which is Hive Learning, which is quite nice, where the players can have their own page, but also then move into some group pages as well. I guess it allows the players to upload footage, and documents and resources. The idea of that is that they can look back at that over a period of time and see development, which is important, that they're registering that. Okay, well, I've put this effort in, I've improved. So I think that helps to show that progress and understand the value of practice, as I said before. What we try and do is, around that player, you've got a multidisciplinary team. So you've got your S&C coaches with even with the young ages. You've got a psychology team. You've got coaches. You've got analysts, and then you've got the parents as well. I think the one that we've tried to include more this year with lockdown as well is the parents. And that's been really useful, I think. And by no means are we done with that one yet. That still requires a lot more work and support, but certainly by including them and having that clarity on what they're working on and why, it's been really good. And also with that, there's clear expectations on what good looks like, and what they should be doing, if that makes sense. Like I said before, that the aim would be for these players to become self-directed learners at some point, and clearly for every player that's different. Some are going to be more self-directed from an early age. Some may take a while to get there, and we've got to appreciate that it's a process. The players are involved in the IDP. Clearly, they need to be motivated to work on these targets. There's no point in it just being fed to them by the coach or even the parent, because probably they haven't got the buy-in or the motivations to then go and work on it. So it's important that with our young ones, they would pick something that's relevant to them. Now that can be something that is a super strength, that's absolutely fine. You know, if they want to go and be better at 1v1s, even though they're good at it, then great, make that into an absolute super strength. Or it could be something they feel, okay, well, I need to work on this because in my game at the moment, I'm not very good at it, and it's probably hold me back, or I feel as though if I work on it, I could do a lot better. Largely, they're quite sort of broad themes with our younger players, which would be things like 1v1 attacking, 1v1 defending, passing, receiving, and probably some finishing as well, and ball mastery. Sorry, so sort of those 5 key areas that we pick. And then what the idea of that IDP is probably then to put that element into a context, so they understand when in the game they should be working on it, or what in particular they're struggling with. So, for example, 1v1 attacking, such a broad theme. It could be recognizing my direct opponent potentially when they get to 11. That's probably achievable. It could be showing more intent when I'm in 1v1 situations to want to beat the opponent. But it's making sure that it's clear on what they're trying to achieve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And when you're looking at timescales or how often they practice this, what does that look like? What do they commit to for that?
Again, that's led by them, really. There's no point me or the coaches saying, right, you've got to train 6 times a week. What we want the players to do is highlight, look, okay, well, I'm really busy. I'm currently at the park every night with my mates playing football. That's fine, but I'm going to commit every 2 lots of 15 minutes per week. Okay, well, then when we sit down and have a review, we would then just play that back to them. How have you got on with those 2 15-minute slots? And if they say, well, yeah, absolutely fine, no problem. Do you think you can increase it? Do you need to increase it? Yeah, okay, I could probably increase that to 2 30-minute sessions. That's fine. And likewise, you know, they might have estimate at the start, you know, and go, well, actually, I could do 4 hours a week. You know, that's part of the learning process. You know, what in terms of their commitment. So if they're going to say, okay, 4 hours a week, that's fine, as long as you can sustain that. You know, if you can't do it, why? What is more valuable? And actually, let's explore a little bit around the quality over the quantity, maybe. So, you know, let's make sure the practice that you're doing is more specific to what you're trying to work on.
And obviously, you mentioned earlier about having parents involved in that. Is there a place which they're drawn into via the kids? Do the kids ever say, "Oh, this is what I want from you"?
Yeah, and again, that probably goes up through the age groups as it goes on a bit more. That's right, as they get older, there's probably more demands. But I think with our youngest players in the phase, it's more just the parents being aware of what they're working on and what good looks like, and how and what the practices they've sort of pulled out. So some of the players will design practices they're going to work on over a period of time, and the parents can be aware of that and maybe support them with feeding, for example, or I don't know, being a goal, whatever it might be. But they can support them that way. Some other age groups, maybe they progress further, might say, look, from you, mum and dad, I need you to do this. So they'd be part of that development plan as well.
And then how formalized is the transition from IDP on paper, on Hive, whatever that looks like, to then in a game setting or in a training setting when they're obviously going to try and use the skills they're learning over here in a practical setting?
Yeah, good. So each week the players would have a sort of 30-minute session working on their IDP within the training environment. So what that looks like is they can pair up with each other, as in other players that work on similar activities. It can just be that if one's working on one for attacking, one's doing one for defending. Yeah, that's quite a nice one to do together. The coach can then look around and go work with specific groups. They can work in tutor groups. There's some work going on there in terms of on the actual IDP focus sessions that they do with the young ones. In the sessions, always the players tend to work in quite small groups, so we're really lucky in terms of our ratios of players and coaches, and we're probably around sort of one coach to maybe 4 to 6 players. So that's quite nice, where actually the coaches can then recognise the needs of the individual more and actually what they're working on and try and put that into the session. I guess one of the things that we're currently working on is across the phases, things like session design, and actually thinking about what that player needs in that session. So, for example, 1v1s are quite big in the foundation phase. And one thing we might consider is even just the specific task that that player has to support his IDP. So maybe that's the reward or to restrict what they're doing. It could be that direct opponent, which is quite a nice one. So give him that different challenge. But if for example, we've got a player who's quite big, and relies heavily on using his strength to get away from players, and he's working on a receiving practice, then maybe he's up against a bigger player. So now that becomes more of a challenge for him, or it's more equal. So he's not necessarily getting away with what he normally gets away with. And likewise, you can tweak that in terms of the after action as well. So, for example, if a player, going back to that example earlier of the boy who in tag rugby sort of excelled with his movement, but maybe football didn't show that as often, his 1v1 might be to receive, and the players might work on that receiving on the half turn to play forward. He might have to run it across a line, because actually we're working on his touch, his ability to place the ball in front of the defender and then be strong enough to hold him off. Whereas another player who might be working on, I don't know, maybe his passing or his ball striking after receiving, and that might be on his good or his weaker foot, or his dominant and non-dom foot. He might have to play it into a target or a target player. So it's just recognizing, what do they specifically need in this practice, and just making those real subtle changes and adaptations to challenge the players.
So obviously you've mentioned there around session design, etc. And one of the things you said at the start is you've kind of moved away from necessarily taking a team more to supporting coaches. How have you found that transition in the coach development side? And then also, is there any particular challenges you face moving into that role?
It's for me, it's really good. Development, as a whole is a passion of mine. So to see players developed, great. And see coaches develop. I guess it's all quite similar in terms of that, isn't it? It's probably believing in people, and trying to work out the best way of supporting them, and adapting your approach to challenge them a little bit in terms of their thinking, and be patient with people. I think sometimes we want to give them all the answers, and trying to sort of see it from their point of view as well, because I think that's probably a challenge, where you've always got your opinions and your ideas, but actually, it's about them, isn't it? It's about how they see the world and what they're trying to get from it. So I think one of the biggest things that I try and sort of work with the coaches is just recognizing, okay, well, what is your intent? What are you trying to achieve, and is that landing? And then one of my roles probably is to play that back to them, whether it be observation, whether it be trying to collect some form of data or feedback, and then just having a conversation about, look, did what you intended to do land with this current group of players, and what would you do differently next time, and try and draw out any reflections, and then look to form some actions, I guess. And that's the same for players, really, isn't it? You're looking to support them in the best possible way as well, and look at different techniques. You can't just constantly tell them all the time. It's about drawing out what they're seeing, and did it work? If it didn't, what else can we try? So it's quite similar, I guess.
And how challenging is it for you? Because obviously you've got the academy curriculum, which is obviously going to want the players to work on certain aspects or in certain ways. You're going to have your personal biases on maybe how sessions or parts of sessions should be designed and thought through. So then go with someone else who's obviously got their own, own opinions, own biases, which all three of those may be different or slightly different. So how do you go about aligning those to make sure that, what you're trying to coach in the academy is aligned to what this person is actually delivering in a practical context?
Yeah, again, you need some sort of guidance, don't you, and framework to work from. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to align across different age groups, phases, and across the whole pathway, really. So it's important that there are some guidelines. I think the bits there you picked up on is the curriculum and the club, in terms of what they want from players, and also the players themselves. And I guess the bits to play back to the coaches whilst they're working is, how did this fit in tonight with that theme that you're working on? So if there's a theme around playing out from the back, how did the session fit into that, and what experience did the players get? And get them to check in with that and consider maybe how did for example the session planning, how did their interactions support, and was it realistic in terms of what they were trying to work on in the area of the pitch and the specific theme.
So in terms of level of detail for a session, let's use the playing out from the back example as one, because it's a pretty easy one. Everyone does at some form of playing out from the back. What level of detail with say an under 11s group would the coaches go through in the planning stage in terms of like individual interactions, timings, session design, etc.? What would that process look like from start to finish?
We'd encourage the coaches to ensure they plan, and they know what each other's doing. So we might have, say, 2-3 coaches with that age group. We try and get them to almost have defined roles. We encourage them to work in small groups as much as possible. And like any session, you then at some point play a bigger game or 2 short games with small numbers. So I think one is establish roles within that. So what are they actually doing? And establish timings is key as well. So they roughly know what activities they're doing when within the session. They're checking in with the MDT to see if there's any involvement there, whether that be S&C coaches, psychologists, etc. See if there's any involvement within the session from them, whether that be pretty explicit in terms of them taking the actual session, or whether it be more sort of implicit messages where they're trying to work on some psychological outcomes, but maybe more in the form of a game where they're trying to challenge certain elements of it to get responses, or to put in that situation. And the other bits then would be realism. I think is really important, and context. So making sure what they're doing within the session would happen on a match day. Directional is important, realism, and again, probably things like competition. The coaches then, once they've got that sort of frame in place, I would then say, look, consider then what your interactions are going to be. So for example, if we're working on creativity in the final third, as much as coaching is diagnosing and reacting from that, I think also you need it in the back of your mind how you're going to sort of intervene. So what I mean by that is, if you're saying, right, creativity in the final third as a topic, and then every second you're stopping it and giving the answers, then that's probably not going to support the idea of being creative. So what you might do is have in your head, right, well, okay, I want to give them loads of opportunity to practice here, and maybe we're going to time this part of the practice to go, right, 3 minutes, and then with maybe a little 1-minute feedback, as opposed to, right, we'll let them play and then we'll stop it when we need to. So I think that alignment between what you're trying to achieve and then a suitable intervention strategy is important. And then probably you need to be aware of the individuals you've got. So some players, clearly, you can tell them what they need to do. Some players just want to go and have a go at it. And some people need maybe an arm around them and encouragement at times. And I think that might be important. I think with those ratios, that allows the coaches then to go, look, I'm probably going to be quite hard on this player tonight because, I want him to do better with his defending, for example. Actually, I'm going to set the scene for him. I'm going to let him know that, look, I want you to be on this tonight. I want you to do this. And I'm going to be pretty firm with that. Are you okay with that? I think that's really important in terms of that player-coach relationship, that they don't have any surprises from the coach. They're sort of, they know what the intentions are. They know what they're going to expect. I think that's important as well.
So one thing you picked up there, and that last line you've mentioned, is kind of like the psychology side of it. And I think a lot of people, when they hear kind of psychologists working with under 9s, 10s, 11s, are probably listening a little bit nervous as to how does that actually look, and is it necessary? So in terms of what you guys deliver and what that looks like and the purpose of it, what is the intent behind having psychologists work with the younger players, and how do you think that supports them long term?
Well, I think psychology it happens all the time, doesn't it, in terms of how they're thinking and how they're being stressed within the game. It's naturally going to occur. I think by having psychological input, if you like, it is just drawing out, okay, what is the intent, what are we trying to achieve, and making sure that maybe the session design or the actions or the task that you're setting aligns to that, if that makes sense. And then I guess once you've done that, what's then the level of support? So how are you then going to support these players? Because it's all very well putting them in that situation and exposing them to high stress, high level competition. But it's then like, well, what are the coping strategies? How can we feed that into it? So I think that's what it looks like for our younger players. It's not classroom based. It's very implicit on the pitch. Just tweaking practices slightly, where I don't know, you put a time restriction on it. You put a score in place where they've got to score within a certain amount of time, and then look, how do we remain in flow, for example? How do we remain composed in these situations? And you just try and set up the environment where it promotes that thinking from them and gives them that different opportunity to practice those different skills.
And have you seen that transfer either into improvements in like game scenarios, or in particular, I guess, tournament scenarios where it is going to be slightly more stressful because there is going to be pressures potentially on winning, etc., as well, be it externally or internally? So have you seen benefits crossing over into those situations?
Yes, but again, it's all very well training. I think the constant repetition of doing the matches and those environments as well, because the training is good, but I don't think it's necessarily going to be the same as the real thing. So what I have seen improvements in is when you're doing that sort of work and highlighting to the players the need, and being clear on some of the emotions they're experiencing. And in reality, for our younger players, if they can register what emotions they're feeling, that's probably where we're at, and that's what we're trying to achieve, just them to recognize what emotion they're going through. But actually, the more exposure to the actual competitions and match days is important for me. So the training helps to give them awareness, I would say, and exposure to it. But the match day bits are the most important. And what I've seen probably in terms of improvements of our players, and I guess the improvements I'm talking about is staying calm and under pressure, I guess, through competition and tournaments, is when they've done it more frequently. So when we've done internal games where, I don't know, they're playing different age groups, or they're playing particularly different centres, or we've set up in-house activity, not in-house, but we've set up our own tournaments where teams are coming in. Over a period of time, they've got more used to that environment and more confident as well. And going 1-0 down hasn't phased teams, whereas before, without that exposure, that would be real difficult. But it's a long-term thing with our young players. They all want to win. The environment itself is probably quite challenging and quite daunting at times for them. So it's look, we're not in a race to get there. We're not expecting our players at 9, 10, 11 years old to be cool and calm on the ball all times in all competitions. It's just recognising how we can best support them. But certainly the more exposure, there's a good chance to get more comfortable with it.
Perfect. So we've mentioned previously, and we've had discussions around this, that you're currently doing a lot of work around game formats and how that supports or challenges players, etc. So first of all, do you want to talk through, I guess, some of the research that you've read, just loosely what it says and why you think is important, and then what outcomes you're looking to achieve in order to be changing formats and changing what experiences the players get?
I think one of the biggest things in our phase is that variety, and just ensuring that, we're not just doing the same activity constantly, because the players will have the same situations and that's not necessarily stressing their learning. So again, it probably comes down to what's the intent really in terms of what you play and why, in terms of formats, so 5-5, 66, and how is that supporting and challenging the players. And it was a good thing to reflect on, because we're quite big on our players being like skillful technicians, so making good decisions on the ball. So, but actually, if they're constantly doing the same thing, does that allow for that? And so we started to look at that a bit more, and so we just had a little go at playing some 5v5, and straight away then you had some real good exposure to 1v1s more often. And what that gave you then was probably more opportunities in the game to think about who you're playing up against and what the tactics are going to be. So is it going to be actually, he's quicker than me, I'm going to have to bounce the ball around him. Actually, in this case, I'm quicker than this player, so I'll just look to beat him and be confident in that situation. Likewise, the 1v1 aspect, you get isolated 1v1 quite often. So it allows you then to work on those techniques. The other bits we found from playing those real small formats is the actual 1v1, as I said, the 1v1 defending bit, around just knowing who you're marking. I think sometimes with the slightly larger formats, say 7v7 up to 9v9, sometimes that bit can get lost. So that accountability bit as well is quite big. Whereas look, you get beat, it's probably going to be a goal or a shot on goal at least. So that's been good. I think what we try to do is, as I said there, have intent and be purposeful in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So what we will do is a regular sort of like player development meeting for each age group and go, look, where are the group at the moment? What would be some of the challenges? How could we expose them to different stimulus and different situations? And then link the players into that as well. So what do they need to do? So, for example, some might need to go and play a larger format for a period of time to allow them to have more possession or see if they can take on board information. Some players might need to have more exposure to the smaller formats to get those 1v1s, and maybe that faster pace. Or in terms of that competition, we talk about the psychological bit, that might be an opportunity to stress those individuals. And then once you've sort of had that meeting and discussed what the groups need and what individuals need, you can then sort of plan out then what that week ahead or 2 weeks or a month ahead looks like and put your plan in place.
So in terms of a game day aspect, what does that look like when other teams are coming in? Does it mean that you'll play always 2 5v5s? Does it mean that you might play one larger pitch, one smaller pitch? What does the actual geography of it look like from week to week?
We've mixed it up really, and I think that's probably the beauty of the foundation phase, is that you can do more formats. So for example, we'll for 1 week we'll play with our 9s 177, and it's better to see different things in that situation. And then the following week you might try and do 2 5s. We've also then looked at multiple formats on match day. So we might go from, say, 2 5v5s into 1 7v7, and again, what are we seeing? What can the players do in those formats? Is there any ones that perform really well at 5v5 but struggle maybe at 7v7? Why is that? What do we need to support them with? So again, those bits are always good to put the players in those different environments and situations and draw out, okay, well, what do they need? What are the gaps?
And have you seen that? Have you seen it where people or players really succeed in one environment and then struggle massively in the next one?
Yeah, so we've got some players who fantastic, sort of, you might call out little 1v1 players, but put them into maybe a 9v9 and they can get lost, and that might be down to their understanding at the time. It might be down to maybe even maturation, who they're matched up against. And it's just making sure that you've got, opportunities to see them in different situations. So you're not missing things. So if that player was only playing 9v9 all season and you're only seeing those bits from him that you're going, well, I'm not sure, then you're probably not seeing the best of him. Whereas actually what he might be is just someone who's not necessarily got the game understanding at the moment. Maybe he's a bit of a lower maturation and the format isn't quite getting out what you need to see. That's not to say that he doesn't need to get there. He certainly needs to get there. But it might be that, okay, well, let's support him a little bit more. Let's adapt our approach in terms of how we're giving information. Let's think about different ways, which might be individual clips potentially to help him. It might be him doing a reflective diary or some reflective notes in terms of what he's seeing in the game. Again, it's just trying to get on the same page, isn't it, and understand what he's seeing and how we can best support him and exploring different ways of doing that. So if you can go actually 1v1 bit in this 5v5 you're really good at, but in the 9v9 that looks slightly different. It's going to look like this. How do we get you to do this? What are the steps we need to do?
Yeah, so in terms of trade-offs between the two, because you have other academies that I speak to that say we'll play this format week on week, be it 7v7, 9v9, 11v11, and the players don't really change positions very often. They'll kind of stay in that position because they feel like it then helps them to see pictures or understand circumstance, etc. So in terms of the trade-offs between the two, why have you explored this avenue rather than going down maybe a more settled game-based model?
I think the biggest thing for me is seeing the players in different situations. Like I said, you can probably lose players, or it's trying to. It comes from obviously a place of support, and that's the key thing that we want to make sure that we're seeing the best bits of them, if that makes sense. And everyone develops at different rates in different ways, clearly. And again, this is only an opinion. If you're constantly doing the same thing with them all the time, I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. However, there needs to be an idea about where they're trying to get to as well, if that makes sense. They need to know that, okay, well, in the 9v9 need to be achieving this. I would say it's not completely random and scattergun. It's probably, if you were to look at a percentage, you'd still have a preferred format at certain age groups, and it would just be then how do you dip into these other formats to then support the players. So, for example, it might be agreed that, okay, well, for our under 11s, 9v9 is the format we want to play because that's preparing them at some point for that larger games. They need to understand a bit more about patience away from the ball and making the pitch big and probably creating more possession and less turnovers. That's important. But it might be agreed that actually, well, we've still got some players in this group that 1v1s, for example, aren't great, or need more exposure. So therefore, our secondary position or secondary format for this month might be 5v5. We do that more in training, internal games, but maybe we'll keep our match days as 9v9. So it's not just completely random when you're going to go, right, well, this week we'll do 2v2s on a match day and stuff like that. It's more, what do we need to see really, and what do the players, what support they require.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and obviously teams play around with formats a lot. I think famously Man United play 4v4s, don't they? a lot in their foundation phase. And I know there's been a few articles and papers published about how much more touches they get, how much more 1v1s, etc. they get. And I guess for you, that's something you're able to kind of emulate in this environment where, you know, you're given exposure to different things, understanding underloads, overloads, beating players 1v1. It just gives them more of a holistic environment in which to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, Lee, you've worked in academy football for a number of years now, both, I guess, as a coach, assistant phase coach, and lead phase. How have you seen it transition during that period? Is there anything that particularly stands out to you as what changes that's happened during that time?
Well, yes, since the E12P, obviously working in academies before the E12P was completely different. Obviously, with that in place now, I guess the resources have grown, you know, which is leading now to more support. I think there's more involvement from other disciplines, so there's that sort of management side of it in terms of coordinating their involvement within the sessions in the program. Say there's more opportunities to play games. That's something that's out there. There's loads of different games available for the boys to take part in terms of festivals, tournaments. So again, that's bigger. I think it's hopefully getting to a better place now where it's not just players coming in and almost being assessed. They're coming in and being supported and I guess believed in as well to they can be a good player. So I think I've seen a swing over the years of that, where the players, you know, the coach-player relationship has certainly moved forward, you know, and a number of different things have contributed to that. Probably more regular sort of catch-ups that are put in place. More understanding of the player and opportunity to get to know the player. So one of the things that we've tried to do is probably more of those conversations with players and parents in terms of regular catch-ups and just getting to know them, you know. And I think as well in terms of the environment, it's probably changed. It's less about showcase coaching, if you like, where it was very much about the coach and their knowledge. It's about what the players are taking on board, I guess, and what the players' experience is and how they're being challenged, as opposed to the coach giving them all the information in one session, which I think was something I've seen previously. But it's certainly moved forward, that's for sure, in terms of how it's structured and how it's now working.
And where do you see it going? Where do you see our current path going in terms of support that academies can provide these young people?
I think clearly it's getting better and better. You know, I think that's something that will continue to improve in terms of you know, the support that the coaches can offer. I think trying to sort of meet the needs of the individuals as best we can is an aim. You know, it's a challenging one, but it's an aspiration, I guess, to try and really support the individuals as best we can for skillful coaching and you know, regular check-ins with these players and making sure that we're aligning to their needs and recognising what support and challenges they need. But I think it's in a good place. I think you know, what experience they get at the moment is fantastic. You know, they get to do what they enjoy, hopefully, and get better at it.
And in terms of any trade-offs or drawbacks from the current system, is there anything, I guess, more in the games program side? Is there anything within that is difficult to facilitate, or anything that you think could do with being looked at?
This is without COVID, yeah.
Yeah, without COVID, yeah.
I think in an ideal world, if you could continue in some way to have grassroots football as well, I think that would be a positive. I do think the environment in the training environment and the games program environment is good, but it's almost like under nines playing on nice grass, flat pitches with sprinklers coming out. It's great, it's lovely, but also I think there's a need to go and play and play with your mates at the park and playing puddles and things like that. So I think that's an important part of it. And sometimes I think our young players at 9, 10, 11 miss out on that, and that's important as well, just so they understand what if you like, what it looks like outside of an academy. I think sometimes they miss that, and I think it's important that they recognise, okay, well, this is a great opportunity, I'm going to take the most of it, as opposed to from the likes of 7 years old being around that training ground where it's all nice and almost like Disneyland, as we call it. I'm not sure that's always the best thing. And recognising that there's lots of players that would love to be in your situation and love to have this experience. Sometimes I'm not sure they completely get. So that would help, potentially. And also I think having the opportunity to play at different levels is, as I've said before, is something we do with the schools and districts by them going to do that, football with their other teams. But also, if they're playing for their grassroots team, being the best player, maybe playing up an age, they're going to get some real good experiences and challenges along the way with that as well. And if they're in a league as well, that's something to play towards and win. So that's important. So I think it's those bits as well, which maybe could be added in.
And am I right in thinking like Germany have gone down a kind of route like that, haven't they, in terms of their format? And I know that Bayern Munich have just got rid of, I think, their 9s and 10s age groups. And I think the way they format with their players is that the club in the region takes care of like 4 or 5 grassroots clubs, and then they come in later. I think that's right.
Yeah, so some clubs in Europe do that. The foundation phase will start later. Some clubs in Holland, for example, won't be till 12 or even 13. What they would then do, like I said, there is probably supplement that program below by having good relationships with grassroots clubs and then bring them in later, but almost having the club coaches go and work with the grassroots clubs so they can talk about philosophies and ways in which they want to coach the players. I guess that ensures that there's a good level of quality coaching and also eyes on those players so they can then highlight them then for the team, whether it be 11, 12, 13th, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really interesting model, I think, and it'd be interesting to see how it develops over the coming years. Obviously, with your role, I'd imagine you would add a number of different learning experiences and opportunities to kind of go abroad on CPD events, all that type of stuff. Do you just want to talk through some of the experiences you've had on those and anything in particular that stood out to you, both in a football context, but also outside of football as well?
Yeah, so obviously with the role and obviously at the club, we CPD and development is massive. So fortunate to do so many different maybe courses, whether that be leadership, mentoring programs that we've done through the club, which has really supported my development in those areas, and really grateful for that. Also, I've done more, I guess, formalised courses such as the ECAS course through the Premier League, which again was a fantastic experience to go and look at so many different industries, organisations, clubs.
And do the army thing as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So that was part of it as well, and going out to the Brecons and walking through the night and camping out and all that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, anything like that, it's about drawing out how it links back into your role. What you're currently doing. So, I think some of the clubs that I've been to, in Holland and Spain, and It's been good, eye openers really, in terms of, I guess, specifically for me, is challenging what we do and why we do it. So, as you said before, a lot of teams in Europe, or a lot of clubs in Europe, wouldn't necessarily have the structure we'd have with our younger players. They'd have different programs, and it does challenge your thinking as to go, well, why do we do it this way, and actually what do we get from it, and is there a need to change, adapt, or just have more awareness of those players outside of the academy better. And it might even be that from a result of it, go into these study visits, you create better pathways with the local grassroots teams, or better connections with them, so you can get them in on a more regular basis to then work with them. So that certainly comes from it. I think also, again, interestingly, when you're watching these other clubs work, what I took from it was that actually have a way, and see that through. So every club's going to do their development, and their structure in different ways. I think the key thing is being really clear on what your way is, and how you want to work, and then make sure you then do that. So if you want to go and be a team that play, I don't know, 11v11 at under 10s, because you think that's your best way of developing players, and the best ones go through whatever it might be, and stick with it and go through it. And I think sometimes we're guilty of always looking around, aren't we, and seeing different models and want to actually have your model but do it really, really well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, in particular, when it's kind of results based and you lose to a team, or at the top end they start producing 2 or 3 players, everyone wants to then jump on that, where actually, even if you look at the top end, it's cyclical, isn't it? Like, different teams do well for different periods of time using different tactics. You had 3-5-2 that have been out of football for about 20 years. Conte comes in, wins the league with it, and then all of a sudden every man and his dog's playing 3-5-2. Pep came across, did really well. Everyone was playing tiki-taka. Then everyone started pressing because Klopp came across. And I imagine it's a similar space in the sports development, in the youth development space, in terms of making sure that actually you have your way, you stick to it, and we incorporate maybe good bits or good learnings that other people do that we can then use in ours. Is there any particular visit or experience you had during that thing that really stands out to you, that was kind of either particularly thought-provoking or kind of really, really changed the way that you dealt with individuals or players?
So one of the activities or observations we did, or study visits, was to British diving, I think it was, down in Plymouth. And I think what struck me about that one, again, it's an individual sport, which is slightly different, but what I got from it was the environment. So when you walked in, the athletes were literally straight on to what they were working on. So I found that amazing, that from our environment, where it's probably quite coach led in that space, where it's like, look, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this, playing a game. They had a plan, and they're obviously working on certain techniques with their diving, or some athletic skills they're working on, but they were literally left on their own to go and work on it. And the coach just then walked around, observed, checked in, maybe challenged them or pushed them further. And I thought that was really skillful. And whilst recognising that it's different in football, and probably our age of our players were slightly younger, that's something probably to aspire to get towards, where actually the players are taking that level of ownership in their training, where it's not completely coach led. I think that's where you want to get to, where that environment is that. So the players come in and, for example, they're able to then work on something without the coach asking them to do that. So that might even be at our youngest age, getting a ball and actually working on something on their own. whilst they're waiting for the rest of the players to get there, for example. It might be them being proactive to go and check in with their tutor group coach and ask questions about the weekend. So those bits I took from that visit in particular, going, wow, this is a great environment where they clearly are taking ownership. They know what they're working on and why, and they know what they got to achieve, if that makes sense.
Did they say anything in particular about how they got to that point? Was there any particular steps they'd taken to get to there?
Yeah, interestingly, the coaches were like, well, "It's just what we do." You know, they know what they've got to work on. They've got an area of focus. Off they go. So I think that might be more, just culture, really. Yeah, that's the way they coach it. Is it again? It's an individual sport, so there is that context, and it's slightly different in that area. But ultimately, look, they put that ownership on the players to go and work on the bits.
I think it's really interesting. Imagine if you did that for a year where the coach just kind of stepped back, didn't say a lot, and the kids turned up. What would they actually do? Would they just play headers and volleys or whatnot? Would they just play games? Or would after a while they start going, well, actually, no, I want to learn and develop? And then the coach could say, well, what do you want to learn and develop? And he might say, my bicycle kick. Okay, well, how are you going to improve your bicycle kick? And then just let them crack on with it. I think that would be a really interesting space. But whether you'd have the time to actually integrate that in, I guess, is the challenge. So I guess last question for me, because we're fastly approaching the time we're allotted, which is who's the best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why? Now, obviously, I know you used to coach me, so I'm going to disqualify myself right off the bat, because otherwise that'd be an easy answer for you. So, best player or coach you've worked with or against, and why?
That's a difficult one, right? Player or coach? I might sit on the fence in this one. So I think with the best players, I'm fortunate in a position now where I've been doing this role for a period of time where the players are now starting to go into the 18s, 23s, even the first team. So I think that's great to see, and it's nice to have a small level of input into their development. So that's been great in terms of working with some of those boys from our academy that have gone through, and I think that's a real nice reference point to see what they've done on their journey. Whilst recognising that everyone's different, but that's great at the moment, seeing that, and also remembering back to what their time was like in the foundation phase and what they could do and couldn't do.
Was there any common threads between those lads that have gone on to progress?
Certainly attitude. I'd say that ability to want to go and practice, want to work hard, but also a love of football. It is tough, and I remember some of these situations where some of those boys in particular would be taken on tours, maybe crying, upset, but there's always that love of football there, and a real desire to want to get better and be the best player. I think those bits stand out. And probably finally on that one is probably they're happy to be challenged, I'd say, or want to be challenged. So I think in that environment, you can be challenged in so many different ways. Those players that have probably gone through have probably, in some cases, really craved challenge, and want to be stretched. So I think that's something that stands out. And coaches, I'm really lucky that a lot of the coaches that we work with at the club, and this is probably not necessarily directly answering your question, but I think working with some of these coaches that are so keen to develop and improve, share ideas, support each other, I think is the best bit. And having a coaching team that want to get the best out of the players and support the players is great. So I've dodged that one massively in terms of a coach. But what I look for in a good coach is someone that I guess just believes in the players, believes that that player can achieve their dreams, can be a Premier League footballer, and can get there. And their job is just to try and support them as best they can.
Perfect. Listen, Smudge, really appreciate your time. Loads of great stuff, and catch up with you again soon.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.